10 years ago, a small diner owner hung a handwritten sign in his window. Any veteran eats free. No questions asked. He had no idea if it would last a month. He had no idea it would nearly bankrupt him twice, that a corporation would try to buy him out and tear the sign down, or that a single veteran who walked through that door in year 3 would end up saving the restaurant's life in return. This is the story of a diner called Frankie's, a sign that never came down, and the decade-long chain of quiet debts that got repaid one plate at a time. Frank Delgado didn't come from money, and he didn't come from a family of veterans either. He came from a small kitchen in the back of his uncle's diner, where he learned to flip eggs before he learned to drive. By the time he was 35, he'd save enough to buy out the place himself, a modest 12-table diner off a state highway, the kind of spot truckers and locals knew by name, but nobody else really did. Frank named it Frankie's, put his own name on the sign, and figured that would be the extent of his legacy. A decent diner, decent coffee, decent life. The idea for the sign came from something small. A regular customer, an older man named Louis, mentioned offhand one morning that he'd served 2 tours in Vietnam and that nobody had thanked him for it in over 40 years. Not because people were unkind, but because nobody ever thought to. Frank didn't say much in response. But that night, after closing, he sat in his empty diner and thought about it for a long time. The next morning, he taped a piece of printer paper to the front window. In black marker, in handwriting that wasn't even particularly neat, it said, "Any veteran eats free." No questions asked. He didn't do a press release. He didn't post it online. He just taped it up and went back to flipping eggs. For the first few months, almost nobody noticed the sign. A handful of veterans came in, ordered quietly, ate, and left. Some suspicious it was a trick, some too proud to say much about it all. Frank never made a show of it. He never asked for ID, never asked which branch, never asked what they'd seen. He just took the order same as anyone else. And when the bill came, he'd simply say, "This one's on the house. Thank you for your service," and move on to the next table. Word spread slowly, the way it does in small towns. One trucker mentioning it to another, one veteran mentioning it to a buddy at the VFW hall 2 towns over. Within a year, Frank was serving free meals to 15, sometimes 20 veterans a week. That's when the math started to become a problem. Frank ran the diner on razor-thin margins to begin with. 20 free meals a week wasn't charity he could easily absorb. It was real money, real ingredients, real hours of labor that weren't being paid for by anyone. His wife, Carol, who kept the books, sat him down one evening with the numbers spread across the kitchen table. "Frank," she said, "at this rate, we lose the diner in under 2 years." Frank looked at the numbers for a long time. Then he looked at the sign in the window, visible even from where they sat. He didn't take it down. By year 2, Frankie's was in real financial trouble. Frank cut his own hours to save on labor, working the counter himself most days, sometimes 16 hours straight. Carol picked up a second job at a nearby pharmacy just to cover the gap the free meals were creating. They stopped taking a paycheck from the diner most months, living instead off whatever Carol brought home. Frank never told the veterans who came through the door any of this. He never once let on that the sign was costing him his own kitchen. It was Louis, the same regular who'd unknowingly inspired the sign in the first place, who eventually noticed. He'd been coming in for years, and he started paying attention to small things. Frank skipping his own lunch, the diner's hours quietly shrinking, a maintenance issue with the roof that never got fixed. Louis, a retired contractor, started fixing small things himself without asking. A leaky faucet here, a loose railing there. The same quiet, no questions asked generosity Frank had been giving out for 2 years. "You helped me feel like someone still gave a damn," Louis told him once. "Least I can do is keep your roof from caving in." It wasn't enough to save the diner on its own, but it was the first sign of something Frank hadn't expected, that the debt of gratitude might not just run one direction. In year 3, everything nearly ended. A regional restaurant group made Frank an offer to buy the property, a generous one, enough to pay off every debt Carol had quietly been managing and walk away with something left over. The buyer's plan was clear: gut the old diner, put in a modern fast casual concept, and the sign, along with everything it represented, would come down within the month. Frank sat with the offer for 2 weeks. Carol didn't pressure him either way. She knew what the sign meant to him, and she also knew what the debt was doing to them. The night before Frank was supposed to give his answer, a young veteran named Marcus walked into Frankie's for the first time. He'd just been discharged, was struggling to find steady work, and hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. He'd heard about the sign from another veteran at a job center and had nothing to lose by walking in. Frank served him the same way he served everyone. No questions, no fuss, just a hot meal and a thank you for your service. But something about Marcus's face, the exhaustion, the quiet dignity of someone trying not to show how much he was struggling, reminded Frank of Lewis all those years ago and of his own reasons for taping up that sign in the first place. Frank turned down the buyout the next morning. Marcus kept coming back. He didn't have much, but he had time, and he started showing up early, before opening, to help Frank prep the kitchen in exchange for nothing more than a standing invitation to eat there whenever he needed to. It turned out Marcus had a background in logistics and supply chain management from his time in the service, skills that had nothing to do with cooking, but everything to do with running a struggling small business more efficiently. Without being asked, he started looking at Frank's ordering patterns, noticed the diner was overpaying a supplier by nearly 15%, and helped renegotiate the contract using logistics knowledge from his military training. He helped restructure the shift schedule to cut labor costs without losing service quality. He helped Frank see, for the first time in 3 years, a version of the diner's finances that didn't look like a slow-motion collapse. By the end of that year, Frankie's wasn't just surviving. For the first time since the sign went up, it was breaking even, sign and all. Marcus eventually got hired full-time as the diner's manager, a job that let him build the stability he'd been missing since coming home. He liked to tell people later that Frankie's didn't just feed him during the hardest month of his life. It gave him back a sense of purpose he thought the Army had taken with it when his service ended. Word about Frankie's spread beyond just veterans looking for a free meal. A local news segment ran a short piece on the diner's 10th year with the sign still in the window, and it caught more attention than Frank ever expected. Other small business owners in neighboring towns started reaching out, asking how Frank had made it work, some inspired to start similar programs of their own. A culinary school 2 counties over started sending students to Frankie's for a single afternoon each semester. Not to learn recipes, but to learn, in Frank's words, how a business can still have a soul even when the math says it shouldn't. Veterans who'd eaten there over the years began showing up not for meals, but to help, repainting the diner's exterior one weekend, fixing the parking lot potholes another, several of Lewis's contractor friends replacing the roof for free the year after Lewis himself passed away, calling it finishing what he started. Frank never asked any of them to. They just kept showing up the same way he had all those years ago when nobody asked him to hang a sign in his window either. Frankie's is still standing today, 10 years after that first piece of printer paper went up in the window. The original sign is long gone, worn out by weather and time, but Frank replaced it, this time with a proper wooden one, hand-carved by one of the veterans who used to eat there for free and now works construction full-time. It says the same thing it always did. Any veteran eats free. No questions asked. Marcus still runs the diner's day-to-day operations. Carol still keeps the books, though these days the numbers tell a much steadier story. Frank, now in his 60s, still works the counter most mornings, still greets every veteran who walks through the door the same simple way he did on day one. When asked, years later, if he ever regretted turning down the buyout that would have made his life easier, Frank just shrugs. Almost lost everything keeping that promise, he says. And everything I have now I got back because I kept it. Funny how that works out. If this story moved you, remember, sometimes the smallest promises cost the most to keep and pay back in ways you'd never expect. Subscribe to Quiet Heroes for more real stories about the people who give without expecting anything back. See you in the next one.